Hey everybody, I'm Bobbie. It's Wednesday. That means it's time for another episode of Weird History You Never Knew You Need to Know. On today's episode, we are going to talk about the history of the land of Israel. So I decided that in looking at the history of the timeline of the land of Israel, we need to take it all the way back. We're going to go all the way back to the beginning. I'm taking you guys all the way back so that you can understand the full history of the land so that nothing is left out. So we're going to start today's story between the 17th and 6th century BCE. We are going to start the history of Israel looking at biblical times. We're going to start back, which is the beginning of the documentation that we have on the land of Israel. In 17th century BCE, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs of the Jewish people and bearers of the belief in one God, settled in the land of Israel. However, very shortly after they established this land, there were famines that drove these people out of Israel and into Egypt, where they remained until the 13th century BCE. So that's 400 years that they remained not in the land of Israel, but in Egypt. In the 13th century BCE is when it is believed that Moses led the Jewish people from Egypt back to Israel, back to the Promised Land. From 1020 BCE to 586 BCE, the Jewish monarch was established. And this was established as naming Saul the first king of Israel. This was also the time when the first temple was built in Israel. And one of the main conflicts in this area is the Holy Land and the claim to the land. So the first Jewish temple was built during this time. After the first temple was built, the Assyrians conquered Israel. And during this time, that first temple that was built in Jerusalem was destroyed. This now leads us into the next era. The next era was from 538 BCE to 142 BCE, and this was when it was under Persian and Hellenistic rule. During this time, there were several things that happened. Between 538 and 515 BCE, many Jews returned to Jerusalem, and the second temple was built. For 200 years, everything kind of remained the same. In 332 BCE, Alexander the Great conquered the area of Israel and Jerusalem, which then moved the area into a Hellenistic rule. The Roman rule of Israel began in about 63 BCE and it went all the way to 313 Common Era. This would have been during the lifetime of Jesus of Nazareth. The Roman ruling comes to an end in 313 Common Era. From 313 to 636, Israel falls under Byzantine rule. So keep in mind, this is 313 CE to 636. We are currently in 2023. So this is over 1,500 years ago that this was happening. In 614 CE, there was a Persian invasion, which then the area of Israel is completely under Persian rule. And during this time too, it's important to note that there was a lot of people moving. So there were a lot of Jewish people that were leaving the area of Israel and they were going other places. And people that were left in the area, there was a lot of conversion happening at this time. And so there was a lot of conversion to the Muslim religion because this area is where the Muslim people believe that Muhammad ascended to heaven in this same area. So it's really important to note that yes, this is the area where Jesus of Nazareth lived, but this was also the same area where the Prophet Muhammad came. Same exact area, you guys. So it's really, really important to know that. And then it's really important to understand that this created a huge amount of conversion or people following the Muslim faith. And this was a long time ago. Over 1,000 years ago, almost 2,000 years ago. So from 636 until 1099, Israel was under Arab rule. So about a little over 400 years of just continue. Imagine 400 years. How many generations is that of people living in this area? Their families are there and they're practicing their faith. In 691, the Dome of the Rock was built. This was a place of worship that was in the same location as where the first two Jewish temples had been built, which had been destroyed several hundred years prior. And in this area now, it is a Muslim place of worship. And this is where they believe that Muhammad ascended to heaven. So 691, the Dome of the Rock was built. The Dome of the Rock stands to this day in Jerusalem. There is also a part of a wall of the second temple, Jewish temple, that was built and that was destroyed. There's a portion of the wall that's left. And you may have heard it referred to as the Wailing Wall. Now, more commonly, it's referred to as the Western Wall. But this is a place of huge religious significance to those of the Jewish faith. This land is sacred land, but it's not sacred for just one type of person, one religious sect. This is sacred land for many people. So I think it's really important to remember that. This is everybody's sacred land. This is not just the Christians or not just the Jews or not just the Muslims. This is everybody's sacred land in that area. From 1099 to 1291, this was the time of the Crusades and the Crusade domination. So there was definitely a Christian resurgence that was happening in the area. From 1291 until 1516, Israel then fell under the Mamluk rule. And then from 1517 to 1917, Israel was under Ottoman rule. In 1516, the Ottoman Turks invaded Israel and began to occupy what is known as Palestine. And that rule went on for 402 years, from 1516 to 1918. The Ottoman occupation of Palestine ended by the end of World War I, after the Ottoman Empire, along with the other Central Powers, lost the war to the Allies. Now we're at the end of World War I, and we have a mess in Palestine / Israel because for the last 400 years, they have been under Ottoman rule. And then suddenly that all comes to an end at the end of World War I. And to be really specific, in 1917, the British forces entered into the Ottoman occupied area of Palestine. And by 1918, the Ottoman rule was ended. And the thought was that it was going to be sort of like an independent state that, or like an international zone that was kind of under international law or supervision, and it would be kind of a situation like with what the Allies did in Germany at the end of World War II, how the Allies had 3/4 of it and then the Russians had 1/4 of it, and everything was kind of divvied up and it was under sort of like the Ally or the UN rule. That's what the British were attempting to do in 1917 and 1918 in Israel. There was a Sykes-Picot agreement that was signed in 1916, and it really just kind of envisioned that Palestine would become an international zone, not under direct French or British colonial control, but it would still have military occupation there from the French and the British. And from there, a lot of mandates were created, but it was definitely a time of instability in the area, and things were kind of left to simmer. And as the world was going from World War I into World War II, Palestine was definitely feeling those effects of all of the changes in the world. And we had just come out of World War II, and it was very apparent the atrocities that were committed by the Axis, specifically the Germans, against the Jews. They were moved into ghettos, and then there was the systematic execution of at least 6 million Jews that we know of. It was terrible and it was tragic, and there are not words to describe the devastation that the Shoah caused. And so what this did was, at the end of World War II, when all of this is happening and the world is coming to terms with what Adolf Hitler was doing with the final solution in Germany, the world is starting to see what has happened to these Jews in Europe. And during this time too, because of the systematic execution of Jews throughout Europe, there was a massive influx of Jews that were migrating from these areas back to Israel, back to their homeland, back to Zion, because they were not safe to stay where they were. So they had really nowhere else to go. There were a lot of countries, specifically the US, which made it very difficult for Jewish people to immigrate. And so their options were incredibly limited. So many Jews found themselves going back to Israel. Now we have this large population moving into an area, and a population that hasn't been there really for, I mean, there have been Jews that have been in Palestine and Israel through this entire time. I don't want it to sound like all of the Jews left. There has always been a Jewish population. But for the last, 1,500 years, this had primarily become a Muslim area. And so now there's this huge influx, and where are they going to go? Because there's all of these people moving into a land, and so people kind of just did the best that they could with where they were going. But it was creating all of this turmoil because we have the Palestinians who've been living in this land for over 1,500 years, and it's their land. They've generation upon generation, 1,500 years. You're looking at probably 16 to 17 generations of people living there. Okay, so this is a very complicated situation with different people, diverse people who've been living in the same area for a long time. So we have this influx of Jewish immigrants going into Israel. We have all of this instability. We have this horrible thing that we've just found out has occurred in Europe at the hands of Hitler. And now, what are we going to do with all of these Jewish people? And so Britain it was the UN that was kind of spearheaded this, but Britain was really the one that was calling the shots. And so Britain said, okay, here's what we're going to do. And I can see where this comes from. So the Jewish people have already been through these horrors, the horrors of the Holocaust. You have these people who've gone through this, and you look at Britain and the UN, and they come in and they're like, okay, well, these Jewish people have been through something horrid. So the solution is that we're going to take Israel, which is the land where they originally have come from, but that has been a very heavily Muslim, it's Palestine. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a page out of the book that we did over here in Germany, and we're going to do kind of a two-state system. So we're going to take different areas, and we're going to say, okay, these areas are for the Palestinians, and then the rest of the area is for the Jewish people. So what this did is this caused Palestinian people who've been living in certain areas for many generations, 1,500 plus years. Now we are moving them off of their land where they live, and we're moving them into these areas, these Palestinian states. There are 3 of them within Israel, and all of the Palestinian people are being moved into these 3 small specific areas. Well, wait a minute. This has been their land for a very long time, and now they are being told that they have to leave, and they have to essentially go into these communities that are designated as Palestinian communities. And then the Jews, specifically the Zionist Jews, there is a difference. So it's really important to use the right terms and to really understand what we're talking about here, okay? So we're talking about the Zionist Jews, which are the ones who want to go back to Israel, or the ones who are back in Israel, and they want to reclaim it as their land. But the problem is that other people have also, this has been their home. And what a lot of people do not know is that these areas in which the Palestinian people have been moved to have also been under Israeli occupation. So that means that not only were they forced to leave their homes and their generational land, but they were being forced to move to areas. And the same thing happened to the Jewish people. So we look at the ghettos that were made in Warsaw, in Poland, and different places in Germany, and the Jews were moved out of their homes into these ghettos where they had to live. And that is exactly what happened to the Palestinian people. So this issue is obviously much bigger than me and my YouTube channel, but I do think it's very important to understand that it is much more complicated than it seems at the surface. And it is not as simple as we're just going to support the Jews and in Israel, or we're going to support the Palestinians, because it is a very complex issue with both people having, I think, valid claims to the land, but was it done in the right way? Can a two-party system work in this area? And then what happens is you have these radicalized groups like the Hamas. So, if you have a dog, right, and you abuse that dog and you beat that dog down, eventually that dog is going to bite you. And I don't feel that anyone anywhere should ever hurt someone, take their life, do anything that's going to impact someone else's freedom. I don't agree with that. And I do not support any type of violence in any way, shape, or form at all. I'm a Buddhist, so we don't do violence here. But when it comes to these, radicalized groups, if you have been in a situation where you feel that you've repeatedly been wronged, you're gonna bite. You're gonna turn into that dog. And I think that Hamas is a result of centuries of issues, and then really almost 100 years, 1948, I believe, is when when Britain and the UN instilled the two-party system in Israel. So we're coming up on, close to, it's about, 80, 90 years, and this isn't working. It's not working. And the answer is not terrorist groups, and the answer is not Israel cutting off all supplies and then bombing Gaza. This is a genocide, potentially. And there's some very serious human rights issues that are happening. And I just think the purpose of today's video is really, it's not to take a side in regards to the conflicts in the Middle East, but it is to provide a reference point to really understand the conflict at a much deeper level, so that we can really look at what is the solution. Because I don't think the solution is a two-party state. We can't separate them. This is their land. So what is the solution? And unfortunately, it looks to me like it's just going straight to violence and straight to war. And this is not the answer. This is not the answer for anyone. This is not the answer for the Jewish people, the Zionists, the Palestinians, the Hamas, like everybody. This is not what we're seeing happening. Is definitely not the solution. So anyway, I hope you found this video helpful and insightful, and it just gave you maybe a little bit of a frame of reference, so that you can make more educated opinions when you're forming your opinion on things like this. I hope that you learned something. If you like this type of content, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up so that I know to create more of it. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me on this episode of Weird History You Never Knew You Need to Know. And this is one I really, really think you need to know. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!